Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, what is splitting in the context of borderline personality disorder? If you find this video to be interesting or helpful, please like it and subscribe to my channel. That way you won't miss any new videos. Now, when we talk about the concept of splitting and borderline personality disorder, it's important to recognize that splitting is a non-specific term. Splitting is either a cognitive distortion or a psychodynamic defense mechanism, depending on how you conceptualize it. But either way, the concept of splitting has to deal with dichotomous thinking, seeing things as either black or white, a 0 or a 1. And it's a term that refers to a behavior that we see with mental disorders and we see with individuals who don't have mental disorders. So it's not specific to borderline personality disorder, as I mentioned, and it's not the same thing as the symptom criterion in borderline personality disorder that refers to unstable and intense relationships. These types of relationships are an example of splitting, but we can also see other types of splitting behaviors with borderline personality disorder in many cases. So here I'm going to be talking about splitting as it refers to that symptom criterion. And that symptom criterion is a pattern of unstable and intense relationships characterized by alternating between extremes of idealization and devaluation. I'm going to refer to this idealization-devaluation cycle as the love-hate cycle. And again, it's important to remember that this love-hate cycle is not synonymous with the concept of splitting. We could also look at this particular symptom criterion as an indication of mood lability. And again, mood lability is not specific to borderline personality disorder either. Now, if this love-hate cycle is observed, that doesn't mean that somebody has borderline personality disorder. It's just one of 9 symptom criteria that we see with this disorder. Now, there's some characteristics that are specific to this particular symptom criterion, or characteristics that we oftentimes see in conjunction with the symptom criterion. So with this love-hate cycle, we oftentimes see that it's related to just one person at a time. Oftentimes a new relationship, and sometimes the idealization phase of the love-hate cycle can occur very quickly. This is oftentimes the case if the individual has symptoms of histrionic personality disorder at the same time. Specifically, the one symptom criterion we see with histrionic personality disorder, where they tend to assume relationships are more intimate than they really are. So an individual with borderline personality disorder can of course have comorbid histrionic personality disorder, but even if they just have that one symptom, it would be more likely to see a fast idealization phase form. Another characteristic of this love-hate cycle is that it can continue even when the relationship is over. Most of the time, of course, we conceptualize this symptom criterion as applying to an active current relationship. And of course, the symptom criterion also is a pattern of relationships. So we look through and see these active relationships over the course of a person's history. But this love-hate cycle can continue even when the other individual, the person that the individual with borderline personality disorder had the relationship with, even when they are gone. And there can still be these periods of idealization and devaluation that carry the same extreme behaviors. So the same mood lability can be present even if the other person isn't. Now, we also see that this can cycle fairly quickly. This love-hate cycle can occur in a course of days. We can see the whole cycle in the course of just a few days, or it can take months. We usually conceptualize this cycle as occurring relatively quickly, in a matter of weeks. Now, even though we think of this love-hate cycle as an example of splitting, sometimes we see ambivalence with this particular symptom criterion. So it's really focusing more on the unstable and intense relationship component, and we don't always see the extremes of idealization and devaluation really clearly defined. This is particularly the case in the devaluation phase of this cycle. So an individual is really feeling a lot of hatred or contempt for this individual rather than idealizing them, but there's still this ambivalence oftentimes. Because we have that fear of abandonment that's present at the same time, these feelings of hatred are sometimes mixed in with a concern that the person will leave or a recognition that the person meets some of that individual's needs. So even though this is thought of as dichotomous, sometimes we do see ambivalence here. Another characteristic specifically of that devaluation phase in the idealization devaluation cycle is that it tends to be triggered by a fear of abandonment. That's oftentimes what moves someone from that idealization phase to the devaluation phase. And again, this is fairly consistent with feelings of ambivalence that tend to occur at the same time as the devaluation phase. Another characteristic of the devaluation phase is that it tends to co-occur with a lot of the other symptoms we see with borderline personality disorder. Specifically, the feelings of emptiness, suicidal behavior or gestures, the frantic efforts to avoid abandonment, and the constant anger. However, we can also see the remaining symptom criteria along with the devaluation phase, which would be impulsivity, affective instability, paranoid ideation, and identity disturbance. So with this concept of splitting and borderline personality disorder, it's important to understand the term splitting and how that relates to this idealization devaluation cycle. I hope you found this description of splitting and borderline personality disorder to be interesting. Thanks for watching.